recently this new image generator called ZImage was released, and this is by far the best open source model you can use right now. Now, I already did a full installation tutorial on this when it first came out, but did you know that there's way more you can do than just making images with a text prompt? For example, you can control the composition of your generation with a reference image, or you can also control the pose of your character with another reference photo. And you can already kind of edit photos, even though the main editing model isn't out yet. You can also generate photos of over 4K in resolution with incredible detail using ZImage. So in today's video, I'm going to go over all these advanced things that you can do. And don't worry, I'll make it as easy as possible for you to follow along. Let's jump right in. Thanks to HubSpot for sponsoring this video. First of all, if you're new to ZImage, I would highly recommend that you watch my full installation tutorial first before watching this video. Anyways, the first thing I'm going to show you here is how you can control the composition of your generation or the pose of your character with a reference image. This is called Controlnet, and we already have a working Controlnet for ZImage. So I'm going to link to this page in the description below, which contains instructions on how to use Controlnet for ZImage. So if you click over here or scroll down to the lower half of the page, you'll see this ZImage Turbo Fun Union Controlnet workflow. This is the official workflow that you need to download. So first of all, let's click on this download JSON file. But if you do that, notice that this just opens the JSON in a new tab like this. So what you need to do instead is right click and then click Save Link As. So this workflow can go anywhere. I'm just going to save it in my root Comfy UI folder. All right, the next step is we can go ahead and open up Comfy UI. So let me double click on this to open up Comfy UI. Now, the first step before you do anything is to update Comfy UI. So let's click on Manager and then click Update Comfy UI. And then afterwards, let's click on Restart and then click Confirm. And the nice thing about Comfy UI is you don't need to build any nodes and noodles yourself from scratch. We can just drag and drop the workflow we just downloaded onto our interface like this. Now, this workflow is super simple. Before we go over this, there are a few more models we need to download if you haven't downloaded ZImage before. So over here on this first card, notice that we need to download this Qwen3 text encoder. So if you don't have this, you'll need to click on this file, and then this goes in Comfy UI, in Models, and then in text encoders. You can see I already have this here, and this is 7.8 gigabytes in size. Next, you also need to download the ZImage Turbo model if you don't have this already. So let's click on this, and then this goes in Comfy UI, and then Models, and then Diffusion Models. Notice that this one is around 11.4 gigabytes in size. Finally, you also need this ae.safetensors file if you don't have it already. So this goes in Comfy UI, in Models, and then VAE. This one is only 327 megabytes in size. Now note that you should already have these three models if you watched my previous tutorial on how to install ZImage. So really the only new model you need to download is this one, this Controlnet Union Safetensors file. So let's click on this, and this goes in Comfy UI, in Models, and then in Model Patches. Notice that this one is like 2.9 gigabytes in size. All right, after you've downloaded all the models, let's press R to refresh your models list. All right, so let's go over this workflow. It's super simple. So first of all, you need to upload an image to use as a reference. For example, let me upload this photo of a room, and then this will get passed on to this scaler node, which is off by default. But if you want to resize this image to another dimension, well, you can turn this on, and this will basically resize the largest edge to this value. So for example, if this is 1365 over here and I enable this node, it's going to resize the length to 1024 while keeping the same aspect ratio. And then afterwards, it gets passed through this canny node, which basically detects the edges of this image. And from this canny node, it's going to give us a preview image of the edge map of this image. But then also this edge map is going to be plugged through our prompt, which we will enter here to define our final image. So let's write something like a cozy bedroom at night with Christmas lights and decorations. Now afterwards, this prompt and this edge map is going to be sent to some hidden nodes, which you can actually expand by clicking this button over here. So if I click on that, it's going to basically expand this section, and you should be familiar with this. This is the normal Z image workflow. So let's just go over this really quickly. Here is where it would load all the models. If it's your first time running this, make sure you press R to refresh your model list, and then also click on the drop down for each model to select the appropriate model. So for example, for clip, we need to select this one. For VAE, we need to select this one. And then for this model patch loader, we need to select this one. And then afterwards, here it goes through this node, which determines how much influence your reference image should have on your final image. So right now, this is set to 100%. So that means it should follow 100% of the edge map that was generated with this image. If you want to lower the influence, you can set this to a lower value. So for example, let's try something like 0.8. And then afterwards, this will be plugged through this shift and K sampler. Again, the shift value, I mentioned this in the previous tutorial, but this has some subtle effects on the image. And then afterwards, it goes through this K sampler. If you're not familiar with these settings, definitely check out my previous video where I go over each setting. Anyways, I just tend to leave it at the default. And then also over here is where I can specify the number of images to generate at once. So for me, let's just leave it at 1. And then afterwards, this will basically proceed to generate our image. So up here, we can basically collapse these hidden nodes by clicking back into our workflow like this. And that's pretty much it. Let's click run and see what that gives us. All right, now for my GPU with like 16 gigabytes of VRAM for 9 steps, this took under 10 seconds. And note that I'm using the full Z image turbo model. So this is extremely fast. Anyways, let's go over what just happened. So I uploaded this image. It goes through this scaler, which I set the largest edge to 1024. So basically the longest edge of my output image is going to be 1024. Again, you can just choose to bypass this step if you want to by clicking on this and then pressing Control B. And if you do that, it's basically just going to keep the original dimensions. Anyways, next it goes through this canny edge detector to basically generate this edge map of the scene. And then both this edge map and my prompt is going to be plugged through these hidden nodes to basically generate the image. And then my edge map is going to have 80% influence on the image. And then afterwards, here is my final image. And as you can see, it is indeed a cozy bedroom at night with Christmas lights and decorations. In fact, let me drag this side by side so you can see the before and after. Now that's just a canny edge map example. Instead of an edge map, we can also estimate the pose of reference image and apply that to a new character. So actually, let me start from scratch, and this time I'm going to upload this image of this character doing this pose, and then again, I'm just going to scale the longest edge to 1024, and instead of generating a canny edge map from this photo, I'm going to replace this node with a pose estimator instead. Now, in order to extract the pose of an image or some other Controlnet detectors, you might need to download some additional custom nodes. So first, let's click on Manager, and then at the top here, click on Custom Nodes Manager, and you'll need to search for Controlnet up here and download this one, ComfyUI Controlnet Auxiliary, and this is by this fan Novel 16. You can see I already have this installed here. So afterwards, we just need to replace this node with another detector. So what I'm going to do is double click anywhere and then search for pose, and then we are going to use this one, Open Pose. So all we need to do is basically delete this canny node and then drag the noodles onto this new one instead. So let me delete this and then put this up here. And then this image goes into the input of this open pose node, and then this outputs to the preview image as well as to the prompt. And then here for pose, we have various settings. We can choose to enable detections for the hands and fingers, as well as the body, as well as the face. So let's just enable all three. And then for the prompt, let's write something like an evil sorceress in a black robe in a dark forest. And then again, this goes through these hidden nodes to generate my image. Now for the influence of the pose, let's set this to like 0.7. So I only want it to influence my final image for like 70%. And then this time for the step count, let's just set it to 8 to run this slightly faster. And that's pretty much it. Let's click run. And here's our result. Again, just to review what happened, we basically took this image and then it went through this open pose detector to extract the pose of this character. And then both the pose and our prompt is then plugged through these hidden nodes to generate the image like this. So if I drag this over here, you can see that it does maintain the pose of this character like 70% of the time. So that's how you can control control the pose of your generation from a reference image. Now, instead of pose, let's also do something different. I'm going to double click anywhere on my workflow and then let's type in depth. You can try out all these depth maps, but for us, let's try this depth anything version 2. Notice that you should see all these depth estimators from the dropdown if you've installed this Controlnet auxiliary custom node. So anyways, I'm going to go with this one. Note that this does require this additional model, but it's going to download this automatically once we run this. Anyways, again, we just need to replace this detector node with this one. So let me get rid of this, drag this over here, and then this image goes to here, and then this will output a preview image of our depth map, and then also plug this through our prompt. Now this time, instead of an evil sorceress in a black robe, let's try a cosplayer girl at a convention, and then let's press run. Notice that once it goes through this node, it then automatically proceeds to download this depth anything file from Hugging Face. So it's going to take a while depending on the speed of your internet. All right, and then after downloading the model, it then proceeds to detect the depth of this image, and then again plug it through the workflow to generate our final image. All right, and here's what we get. So let me just drag this over here so you can compare this. So with Controlnet, it's now really easy to control the composition of an image just with a reference image. You can extract the edges or the pose or even the depth of the image, or there's also other detectors you can choose from like line art or anime line art or scribble or a lot of other stuff. But I just tend to use edge, pose, or depth as my main three. So that sums up how you can use Controlnet with Z-Image. All right, next let's go over how we can edit or basically inpaint something in an existing photo. Note that they are planning to release a separate model called Z-Image Edit, which allows you to basically just edit an image using natural language, kind of like Nano Banana, but right now it's not released yet. Nevertheless, you can still edit existing images using the current Z-Image Turbo model. So here's a quick hack on how you can do so. So I've just pulled up the standard Z-Image workflow. First of all, we need to upload an image to edit. So I'm going to double click anywhere and then type in load image. And then here, let me load up this image. Next, we just basically need to replace this node with this new load image node here. Now, notice that this is connected to this latent image node, and right now this is just an image output. So we first need to convert this into latent space first. So I'm going to double click anywhere here and then type in VAE, and we need to select this VAE encode node. So afterwards, I can connect the pixels here, and then this also takes in the VAE, which we've already loaded up here. So let me connect this node to over here. All right, next up here is where we can choose to draw over the area that we want to edit. All you need to do is right click anywhere on this node and then click on Open in Mask Editor. And this allows you to draw over any object that you want to replace. Here is the undo button, or you can also press clear. And here is where you can change the thickness of the brush. So here is a smaller size, here's a larger size. Here's where you can change the hardness of the brush. So if you bump the hardness all the way to the right, then the edge of your brush is going to be like this, whereas if you bump this slider to the left, then the edges are going to be a lot softer like this. So anyways, let me press clear, and let's replace this diary with something like a sleeping cat. So I'm going to draw over this diary like this, and then let me also add some more brush strokes with some softer edges so that it blends in more seamlessly with the photo around the edges. Afterwards, once you're satisfied with what you've drawn over, you can click save over here, and as you can see, it has applied the mask over here. Now the next step is we also need a way to transfer the mask over to our latent image before we plug it through this K-sampler. So let's double click here and then search for latent mask, and we need to choose this one, set latent noise mask. Notice that this node should already be available to you because it's part of the default Comfy Core nodes. So let me select this, and then here I'm basically going to drag this mask output to this mask input over here. And then finally I'm going to connect the latent over to here, and finally connect this latent to the K-sampler, which would automatically disconnect this one. In fact, we don't really need this, so I can just click on this and then press this button to bypass it. And then afterwards, here we can write something like a sleeping cat. Now there's one more value that we can play with, which is this denoise setting. This is basically how much of this area do you want to change. One means 100%, but if you want to keep some of the original image, then you can set this to a lower value like 0.8 or 0.7. For me, I'm just going to go with 1 and see how that performs. So let me press run, and here's what we get. Pretty straightforward. AI is the hottest topic right now. Everyone is talking about it and using it, but there are just so many different AI models out there, it can get overwhelming. If you're wondering which one is the best to use, then this free resource from HubSpot called AI Assistant Showdown, ChatGPT versus Claude versus Gemini, breaks it down for you. This is a side-by-side comparison of the 3 biggest AI chatbots. It shows exactly what each one is good at, where it falls short, and how to pick the right tool for your specific workflows. For each model, it breaks down its core strengths and ideal use cases. What I really like is that it gives you actionable workflows. These are practical, real-world scenarios for you to use the model effectively. The key here is you don't have to just use one model. You can combine them together in these multi-AI workflows to leverage the strengths of each model. This guide gives you a ton of workflow ideas so you can boost productivity far beyond what any single assistant can do. And it gets even better. It also includes 3 real business cases, showing how professionals use Gemini for deep research, ChatGPT for personalized cold outreach, and Claude as a true executive assistant. These are detailed step-by-step breakdowns of AI systems actually used at scale. You can download the full breakdown for free using the link in the description below. This resource was made by HubSpot, the sponsor of this video. Or let's try another example. I'm going to right click here and then click on Open Mask Editor again. And let me clear this mask. And instead, I'm going to draw over this one. Again, it's important to make the edges a bit softer or feathery so that the masked area would blend in seamlessly with the original image. All right, let's just do something like that and then click save. And for the prompt this time, let's try a vase of flowers. And here's what we get. So in a nutshell, that is how you can inpaint or basically edit existing images using the current Z-Image Turbo model. Note that this is still kind of janky. It's definitely not as good as a real image editor like Nano Banana or the upcoming Z-Image Edit. But if you can't wait for Z-Image Edit, then this is just a quick hack on how you can edit images with the existing model. All right, next, let's go over how you can take a generation from Z-Image and upscale it to 4K or beyond. I'm going to go over 2 main ways you can do this. Now, for the first way, you don't need to download any additional models. We're basically going to modify the standard Z-Image workflow. This is what I like to call a multi-pass workflow, where basically we want to just generate an image first at low resolution, and then we'll pass it through Z-Image again to generate a higher resolution. And then for the second method, this does require you to download an additional upscaler, which is around 16 gigabytes in size, but this method is extremely powerful. It's going to add so much more details to your generation, and you can make images in 4K or beyond. First, let's go over this multi-pass method, which only uses Z-Image, and you don't need to download any additional upscalers. So here I'm starting with the standard Z-Image workflow, which you should be familiar with from the previous lesson. Now here, what it's doing is it's just using Z-Image to generate an image in one go. What we're going to do instead is take this image and plug it through another pass of Z-Image. This time we're going to set the resolution to a higher number. So let's figure out how to do this. First of all, I'm going to hold Control and drag over these nodes and then press Control C and Control V to copy and paste this down here. And then afterwards, basically we are going to take the output image from this first pass and then feed it to this new K-sampler. But before we do that, notice that this doesn't take in an image input. This takes a latent image input. So what we need to do first is convert this into latent space. So to do that, let me double click here and then type in VAE, and we need to use this step, VAE encode. So let's connect this image to here, and actually let me drag this VAE encode down here, And this also requires a VAE, which we've already loaded up here. So let me drag this here. And now we can pass this image through our K-sampler. But before we do that, we need to increase the resolution of this image. So I'm going to double click anywhere here, and then I'm going to type upscale, and then I'm going to choose this one, upscale latent by. And then here is where you can choose, how much you want to increase this image by. Let's do like 2 times, and then here are various algorithms you can choose from. Let me connect this over here, and then finally we can connect this latent output to our second K-sampler. And notice that for these 2 nodes, we also need to connect these inputs. So for the model here, I need to connect it to the Z image turbo model. And then for this positive node, I need to connect this down here, plus also the negative node down here. And that's pretty much it. Let's try out a generation. For the original width and height, let's try 768 by 1024. And then for the seed here, I'm going to set the seed to 42 and set this to fixed so that you can reproduce this as well. Basically, this allows you to generate the exact same image that I'm going to show you in a second. If you choose a different seed but keep the same settings, it's going to generate a slightly different image. And then for the step count for this initial image, because this is just the first pass, we can decrease the step count to something like 6 steps to start. All right, so afterwards it's going to generate an image, but then this image is also going to be plugged back into another K-sampler. This time this image is going to be resized by 2 times, and then here it's going to generate the second upscaled image, also using the Z image model. Now, there's one last setting we need to adjust here, which is the denoise value. You see, this is currently taking the image from our first pass as a reference to regenerate a new image. And this value determines basically how much of the original image should we ignore. So right now it's ignoring 100%, which is just going to create a completely different image. That's not what we're trying to do, right? We want to retain actually most of the details of the original image and just upscale it to add more detail. So let's set this to something like 0.5 so that it's going to retain like 50% of our original image, but just add more details to that image. And that's pretty much it. Let's click run. All right, and here's what we get. So again, just to make sure you're clear on what this does. So it first uses the image to generate a smaller image like this, which I've set to 768 by 1024. Then this image is converted back into this latent space. And then I chose to increase the size of this by 2 times. And then this goes back to Z image to generate another round of this image. And here's the result. So again, if I open this up side by side so you can compare, let me just first zoom in on the original image. You can see the details of her face are quite blurry as I zoom in, but over here you can see that her face and her hair are a lot sharper. You can clearly make out the details of her skin, the eyebrows and the eyelashes, and her nose and lips. Now you might be wondering, instead of doing all this mess, couldn't you just set the original resolution to, double the size, which is 1536 by 2048? Well, let's actually also generate an image like this. So what I'm going to do is hold Control and select all these nodes and bypass them so that it only generates this large image in one pass. And then here I'm going to set the step count to 9 so that it generates a higher quality image because we're just running this through one pass. All right, so here's what we get for one pass if we set the resolution to double. Notice that even though I've set the seed to 42 and fixed, it's not the same image as before, and that's because I changed the resolution. As soon as I change some other setting, it's going to give me a completely different image. But nevertheless, let me open this up and give you a side-by-side comparison of making a huge image in one pass versus 2 passes. Now, both of these are the same resolution. Let's compare the sharpness and details of her face. If I zoom in on the faces of each person, you can see that still the 2-pass method adds more details to her face. Whereas for this one, it's kind of blurrier. So I don't know, at least for me, I would prefer a 2-pass method where I would first generate a smaller image, and if I like the image, then I would proceed to upscale it through a second pass. All right, so that's how you can generate a higher resolution image using 2 or multiple passes of Z image. Now, there's a much more powerful way for you to upscale images and add even more detail. So let's go over the next workflow. Here, what we're going to do is use an upscaler called SeedVR2. Now, there are different upscaler algorithms you can choose from, but I found that this one works the best so far. So I'm going to link to this page in the description below, and for generating 4K images, you simply need to download this 4K image upscale JSON file. So let's click on this, and then let's click download. You can put this anywhere you want, but I'm just going to save it in my Comfy UI folder. And then afterwards, we can just drag and drop this Seed VR2 workflow onto our interface like this. Now, when you load this for the first time, you might get some missing nodes. So what you need to do is click on Manager and then click on Install Missing Custom Nodes. It should automatically detect this one, so let's click on Install and wait for this to complete. All right, afterwards, it says Restart Required, so let's click on Restart and then Confirm. All right, afterwards, you should see no more missing nodes. So let's go over this workflow really quickly. First of all, note that there's no Z image in this workflow. Here, I'm first showing you how you can upload an image that you generated from Z image into here to upscale it. But next, I'm also going to show you how you can just connect it to your Z image workflow. Anyways, over here is where you can enable Torch Compile, which is going to take more time to first load up, but it speeds up your subsequent generations. Here it says it's best for long videos, but not for single images. So I'm just going to leave this off. So here, basically, you just need to upload your image. Let me just upload this image. In fact, let me open up this original image, which, as you can see, if I zoom in, it's super blurry. You can barely see the details of her face and hair, so it's not good. Let's bump up the resolution of this. So this image is going to be plugged into here, and here is where it's already automatically set to 4K resolution. And then for all these settings, you don't really need to worry about them too much, but feel free to play around with these and see if it affects your generation. And then afterwards, that's pretty much it. So let's click run. And as you can see, when I first run this, if I open up my terminal, you can see that it has to first download this Seed VR upscaler, which is 15 gigabytes in size. So keep that in mind. And then afterwards, it also proceeds to download the VAE, which is 478 megabytes in size. And then afterwards, it's finally proceeding to generate the image. Alright, and here's our final image. So this is by default already saved in my output folder. And let's open both of these up side by side. On the left is the original image. I'm going to zoom way in on her face and you can see that the details are clearly missing. But here is the upscaled image. Notice the details of this shirt as well as the face and the hair are just like way sharper. Like I can zoom way in and this still looks pretty amazing. That's how good this Seed VR2 upscaler is. Now again, note that this current workflow is not related to Z image at all. Here I'm basically showing you how you can plug your Z image generation into here and then run it through this upscaler. What if you just want to use Z image to create an image and then automatically use this to upscale it? Well, all we need to do is copy this workflow and link it to the regular Z image workflow. So for example, I'm just going to load up this standard Z image workflow, which you should be familiar with if you've watched my previous tutorial. This is the official Z image workflow. And then here, basically all I need to do is basically press Control A and then Control C to copy all these nodes and then paste it in here. Afterwards, let me hold Control and then move these nodes closer to the workflow. And here, instead of loading the image to the Seed VR upscaler, I can just delete this node. And here, basically, we need to join this image output from Z image over to here. Now, notice that here it requires two outputs, the image and the alpha. So just doing this will not work. What we actually need to do is add a new node. So I'm going to double click somewhere in the middle and then search for alpha and then click on this one, split image with alpha. You should already see this because this is part of the Comfy Core nodes. So next we just need to connect the image here and then this is going to split it into the image and the alpha. And then we can connect both outputs over to here. And that's pretty much it. So first of all, let's go over what is going on here. First, I'm going to use Z image to create an image and it's going to be saved over here. But then that image is going to immediately be plugged through this Seed VR2 upscaler to generate an upscaled image in 4K resolution. So let's just go with the default prompt, this Latina female with thick wavy hair. And then for the width and height, let's do something like 768 by 1280. And then for the step count, let's just set it to 7 so it can generate a bit faster. And then let's click run. So it's first proceeding to generate the first image using Z image, which as you can see is over here, but then immediately it's going to get plugged through this upscaler to generate the 4K image. Alright, so here is our initial image, which is only 1280 at the longest edge, and then here's our upscaled image. Now I'm going to open both of these up so you can preview them side by side. So let me open up the original image first. Actually, this is already not bad. You can still see like most of the details of her face, but if we look at the upscaled version, look at just how much more detailed everything is. Like I can zoom way into her eyes, and her eyes, her eyebrows, her eyelashes are still very clearly defined. Same with her skin, and same with her hair, as you can see here. Notice that the details of her shirt are also super sharp, whereas this original image is quite blurry. So there you go. That's how you can generate some incredibly detailed 4K images from your Z image outputs. Alright, so that sums up my tutorial on some more advanced things you can do with Z image. I hope that I made it easy enough for you to follow along and understand. Let me know in the comments what you think of this, and as always, if you run into any errors while setting this up, welcome to paste the error message in the comments below, and I'll try to help you troubleshoot as much as possible. As always, I will be on the lookout for the top AI news and tools to share with you. So if you enjoyed this video, remember to like, share, subscribe, and stay tuned for more content. Also, there's just so much happening in the world of AI every week. I can't possibly cover everything on my YouTube channel. So to really stay up to date with all that's going on in AI, be sure to subscribe to my free weekly newsletter. The link to that will be in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.